Yes, welcome in. Jesse's back from LA. His trip to the Coliseum for the first time. What was that like? Did you have a good time? Not a good time. Was it interesting? First time being in the Coliseum, new road game location checked off for you?
It was cool to be in a venue that had that much history, to see where there have been Olympics hosted. But other than that, it's hard to get that excited. There are some big time Big Ten venues. And like you talked about last week, they sort of one side of the stadium no one can sit in. So even though they said it was a sellout, I don't know that every seat was full. Once the game started, it was another game. But I'm not mad about being in LA at any time when it's 75 degrees. Maybe next year they should schedule, or in the future, these games in November.
Yeah, like when they go to UCLA in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Right? I think they go to Autzen next year. Do they go to Autzen or they go to Washington next year? I think it's Washington next year, maybe. Either way, because I think UCLA then comes here. Either way, looked like a fun environment, and it was fun for a first half for Wisconsin, and then it wasn't so fun in the second half. So we'll get to all of it. Before we do, Home Field is the official apparel sponsor of the camp, best vintage gear that you can find, and they have a ton of new items here so far these last couple of months. New hats, new jackets, this premium football box that you can get that has 3 new things in it. So check them out up at homefieldapparel.com. Use the code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. All right, let's get into this. We always start with the positives. And as negative as the second half was, I thought there was a ton of positives in the first half. That certainly got overshadowed, and for good reason, because of what happened after halftime. But I think this is the first week maybe since last year that maybe we have these many positives that you can talk about, at least to begin the game. Where do you want to start with that?
Big picture wise, and this is part of what I wrote about off the game, I felt like that first half was everything Wisconsin aspires to be under Luke Fickell. They were aggressive, opportunistic. They executed at a very high level. This is what people wanted. And yes, USC made some mistakes, but you have to take advantage of those mistakes. Zachariah Branch, the punt returner, let the ball bounce off and roll through his legs. Wisconsin was able to recover, but then the Badgers managed to score a touchdown. We've seen they've gotten in the red zone early this season and haven't been able to capitalize, had to settle for field goals. They forced a couple turnovers. Preston Zachman had a great interception. Obviously, Austin Brown came off the edge for the sack. Ben Barton recovered. They just had everything rolling. And Braden Locke dialed up some big pass plays. It's not something we've seen through 3 games. And that 63-yarder to Vinny Anthony was just the most perfect throw, hit him in stride, right past the DB. And then the other throw that went to Bryson for 35 yards. It felt like did about as much right as you could do. I know USC scored early, but that's another thing. Them getting down early and then not just putting their head down, they fought back. This was the Wisconsin team that everybody has been waiting to see. And that's, I think, why the second half was so crushing, because it felt like this is a moment. Are we in the midst of a moment for this program to potentially turn the corner? And I think the way I phrased it was they ended up being backed into one and not figuring out a way to get out.
A wordsmith.
That might have been the best sentence in the whole story. I don't know that the rest of it was particularly good, but hey, neither was the second half.
I really thought, and you don't get too ahead of yourselves, but I was talking, we did our post-game show, myself and Ben Kenny, and we talked at halftime, and we're like, let's just focus on the first half and some of these minute details that they've done so well. And maybe we can talk about big picture stuff, as maybe this is the turning point for the program. But there was just so much good stuff that happened in that first half outside of a few mistakes here or there. Wisconsin played the type of game that you were expecting them to play, because they were going to make strides. This is not just the type of game you expected them to play going into it. I'm talking about this is the type of game that you expected them playing as coming into the year, because this was going to be the jumps that they were going to make off of last year. And you're right. The pass to Vinny Anthony, explosive plays in the passing game have been few and far between, but drilled that one. Not even drilled it, but just dropped it in the bucket. And, Vinny Anthony right in stride, and such a great route by him to get free of his guy, a little stutter and go. And just the 2 turnovers they did force. And you mentioned Preston Zachman making a great pick. I don't know if it happens if they don't get the pressure which forced Obviously, uh, my, uh, Miller Moss to have to get that ball out probably earlier than he wanted to. Elijah Hills, some of the stuff, some of the pressure that he was able to provide in the backfield, the crashing down on the goal line that almost resulted in a safety. There were just so many moments that you could point out and say, God, that looks fantastic. And that's exactly what I think we were expecting to see starting this year.
Yeah, it was. I don't know how you could play much better. You go on the road against a top 15 team. I did wonder in part what's going to be the difference here where USC is coming off this physical smash mouth game against Michigan. That was a loss, and Wisconsin has this extra week to prepare. You and I both said on our Thursday show leading up to the game that we felt like Wisconsin would be in a position to make a game of this, to keep it close. And they went well beyond that. They had that 21-10 lead. It's just the inability to be able to sustain that for 4 quarters. We've seen this consistently, especially against some pretty high level programs where the playmakers just go and make the plays. But if you're looking for that silver lining and the positives, the fact that they were able to do this for a half is encouraging. It's just, again, it's hard not to look at the entirety of the game, because how can you not?
We'll get to it. I thought the offensive line as well, maybe not just in the first half. I thought that they protected well for much of the game, and I continued to be impressed with the tackles. Again, I know that there are negatives there in the second half that we can point out and we'll get to, but the offensive line has continued to be a brighter spot for them, certainly more so than we saw last year. And Vinny Anthony made not just the touchdown throw or the touchdown catch, but also recovered the fumble off of Zachariah Branch. Whether he touched it or not, the other guy certainly did. And Vinny Anthony was able to jump on it. There continue to be little moments here and there that I impressed with what Wisconsin has what was able to do. And I'm trying to extend this positive thing into maybe some other aspects. Oh, I thought Phil Longo in the first half called a great game. I thought that there were a lot of change-ups. The throw to Riley Nowakowski around the goal line was a great call and wide open, and something that I thought maybe we would see a little bit more in the second half for an over-pursuing defense and getting, just slowing them down a little bit. And that was certainly the case in the first half.
Atticus Bertram should get a special mention here too. He's been great. Obviously, that was a bit of a knuckle punt, but they'll take it. 74-yard punt that rolled down, was down at the 1. I think this season overall, he's been pretty solid. And even if the punt to Branch, you didn't hit it ideally, it worked out. So I think he's made considerable strides. And sometimes those types of things can get lost in the shuffle when the team isn't performing. But I think I'm glad you mentioned the offensive line. It may not be, and I don't know if we'll see this in the near future, at the highest of the high level that Wisconsin's offensive lines have performed, but they've, to me, made considerable strides in terms of being able to protect. You certainly like maybe more yards per carry, but they've done a very solid job here for the most part, I think, early this season.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of yards per carry, Darian Dupree. Early carries for Darian Dupree. This also probably goes into we can probably get in the negative with this as well, but that was a little bit of a surprise to get him out on the field. He was the second guy to get carries. Obviously, Ches Malusi was the first, and Darian Dupree was the second. And then they certainly used Tui Walker and even Katie Akamelli a little bit, and Jackson Aker got that swing pass. But Darian Dupree early in the game, that kind of feels like something that could expand as we get further here into the season. I would like that to be the case. I think he has some of that big playability that maybe the running game hasn't always had. But that pass play to Vinny Anthony was the longest pass play they've had under Phil Longo. And we were expecting that to be a lot bigger part of the offense. But hey, it came. It took till game 4 of 2024, but it came, and it was a perfect ball, and it was exactly right where they needed it to be. And trying to think, is Atticus Bertram's the MVP of the team so far? I mean, he's dropped 2 punts off of guys that resulted in touchdowns later on. No, he's the special teams MVP. Teams MVP. Yeah. No. You got anything else
to say who the MVP would be to date?
Maybe we'll talk about that on the next show. Do you have anything else positive wise?
I don't think so. I mean, we
All right.
covered it. It was as good of a first half as you could have possibly hoped for.
Agreed. Agreed. All right. Negatives.
Well, they did have to play a second half, and that is tremendously unfortunate for Wisconsin. This segment's going to be longer, I'm sure, than the first one, because it also speaks to some big picture issues. But they got outscored 28-0. Let's just say that right off the top. You couldn't have been much worse. You had 10 first downs in the first half. You couldn't move the ball in the second half. You only had 3 first downs. Those explosive plays kind of disappeared. And then you had some critical turnovers. Tyrell Henry muffed the punt, gave the ball away. You can't do that.
Who do, who, who do they trust back there now? Vinny
I
Anthony's
don't.
put it on the ground. Tyrell
Yeah,
Henry's put it on the ground. We know that Tereshka Kahuna's, some of the concerns there in terms of catching is why he's not back there to begin with. Who do they put back there? Like, I know last year when Chimray got hurt, that Hunter Wohler was at least an option, more so just to catch the ball than anything else. I know I've hammered this home way too many times, but the only important thing at the end of a punt return is that you have the ball.
yeah.
And that was such a huge play.
I still think. I mean, Vinny Anthony would probably be, but the guys they've looked at, those were really the 3 that we saw. Who else did we see out there in practice that was
CJ Williams? They had
yeah.
put back there a little bit. I don't know if Darian Dupree was a part of that, but
I think maybe in the
again,
kick group where they evaluated a bunch of different dudes. But you're right.
Yeah,
That's the most important thing. And sometimes you just need a possession guy. Just catch the ball and put us in a position to not be up against it. So there's just so many different things. The 4th and 1 run out of the shotgun, and we can break these all down one by one. It's the fact they couldn't block. Maybe we should talk about that too, because Luke was asked specifically about that after the game, that there have been some former players that have voiced their displeasure. J.J. Watt certainly during the Alabama game, they failed to convert 4th and 1s in consecutive games. And what he said is, it doesn't matter to me whether we're in the shotgun or under center. You have to be able to execute the play and block. And they didn't. The backside of the play was wide open. The safety came in off the edge, stuff to Wee Walker for no gain. And then obviously USC is able to take advantage and score. And defensively, they can't get off the field. The third downs were an absolute killer. USC had a touchdown drive where they converted 3 third downs. One of them was 3rd and goal from the 6 and ended up being a 6-yard touchdown pass. And then on the next drive, they converted a couple more, and then they didn't get the third, but Miller Moss converts on 4th and 1. USC ended up, 11 for 17 on third down? That's unacceptable. I realize that USC has incredible playmakers. Like Jacoby Lane is just unbelievable. It was very clear from the very first drive what their plan was. Let's throw it up to our dude and let him go make plays. But you've got to be better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I went back and looked, the last 2 weeks, what Wisconsin's given up on third down. I mean, they've given up, you said it was 11 for 17. Is that what you said?
I'm going to pull up the stats right now. It was 11 for 17. That's correct.
And it was 8 for 14 against Alabama. That's going to be tough to overcome. And I look at the third and I think it was 3rd and 15, and it was after the muff punt. They had him at 3rd and 15. And we heard Mike Tressel talk about it last Monday. Can't let Miller Moss sit back there and play. Can't let him sit back there and throw the ball around, because if you do, it's going to be a situation where he's going to find a guy. And what does he do on 3rd and 15? And they brought pressure a lot. So I'm not saying that he never brought pressure and he didn't allow him to sit back there and throw. They brought 3 guys on 3rd and 15, and it allowed Miller Moss to get outside the pocket. And he made a ridiculous throw, and his guy made a ridiculous catch. But why even allow him that opportunity? I think the 3rd and 6 you're talking about, the goal line, was they brought everybody. And Hunter Wohler, they're all in man coverage on the back end, and Hunter Wohler was right there, and the guy made a great play. I don't understand you saying we can't let him sit back there and throw. And he mentioned a third down play against Michigan where he had all day to throw, and he made a throw that he shouldn't have been able to make, and all that's whatever. You can't let a guy sit back there and do it, and they did on that play. So that was unfortunate. And the 4th and 1, it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't matter. And again, I don't have a strong take one way or the other under center or shotgun. I know all the former players because they saw a fullback get it on 4th and 1 for 15 years. That's just, the way that it's supposed to be done. But almost every other team in the country routinely goes 4th and 1 from shotgun and routinely makes it. And Wisconsin made it the previous week against Alabama. Yeah, they got stopped on the one that mattered, but they converted one later in the game. So it's about execution for me. And even if the safety that came off the edge, the linebacker, whoever it was that came off the edge and made the play, even if he doesn't make the play, Joe Brunner got whipped. And his guy was right there to stop Tui Walker anyways. So the execution wasn't there. That said, if you're going to be in shotgun, what's the point of being in shotgun if your quarterback is just not even going to look to see if a guy's crashing down? And I know Braden Locke does not have great wheels. Neither does Miller Moss. And he did the exact same thing on 4th and 1 near the goal line and made what we believe is Wisconsin's best defensive player miss and get in for the touchdown. So there's a lot that goes. I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about with that 4th and 1, about the execution, about the decision, to not even for Braden Locke to not even consider potentially holding it and going, and just the idea behind shotgun or under center. There's so much to go into it than simply they should be under center. But
I look at it too, and I'm sure we've talked about this at some point. If you're going to be a shotgun team, if you're going to run this offense, then run this offense. What would that say if you never went under center and then you did in this moment? And let's say you didn't get it. You cause yourself a bunch of second guessing too. You don't even necessarily practice that. We very rarely, I can count on one hand probably the number of plays the entire preseason where they went under center. That doesn't mean it can't be successful, but it's like, be who you are. But if you're going to be who you are, execute at that level. And that's where the frustration is, because Wisconsin knew who it was for so long. And generally with those fullback dives was able to execute it. You're right, though. You are very limited when you've got Braden Locke in there. And that play Locke scored on, I was watching it and was just staring right up the middle going, oh my God, Wisconsin stuffed him. Meanwhile, Miller Moss is out on the edge here making this great play. It was a great fake. And Wisconsin right now just doesn't have that ability, so they're even more limited.
We don't even have to think about whether it works or not with a guy under center. We saw it last year against Iowa.
Yeah.
Tanner Mordecai, little bobble of the snap, and it didn't matter because Cooper DeJean was coming off the edge hot, just like the safety, just like the guy did against USC, or I should say for USC. It's too slow. If you want to take issue with anything, I take issue with the play call, because it's way too slow developing of a situation. You need to pound it up in there. Just go. Don't be pulling guys. Just go. And obviously the two tight ends being pulled and going. It's tough. It's very, very tough to not tough to get the yard, but it's way too much can go wrong in that situation. Just go get it. And they obviously did not go get it. So 4th and 1, that was a huge play. The Tyler Henry play obviously was the game changer, but it really was those two moments, and they happened similar, close to it, right? Because Tyler Henry muffs the punt. USC is able to get down there and score. Wisconsin goes back down the other way, and they're in USC territory on their next drive, and then can't get it. USC goes down and takes the lead, and you knew it was over at that point. So, not ideal at all for Wisconsin. Braden Locke is as consistent as anybody I have ever seen. I don't know how he does it. He has completed it for his career. He's completed 50% of his passes, but he has completed 50% of his passes in games more times than I've ever seen a quarterback do it. He's done it these first two games. He did it a bunch last year. It's insane. I don't know how you're that. I mean, that is impressive to be able to complete exactly 50% every single time you step on the field.
I wrote that he has an uncanny ability to do so. He was 13 for 26 against Alabama, 13 for 26 against USC. And the other piece of this is obviously you are not going to be able to consistently win games, especially against teams like this, when you're only completing 50% of your passes in an offense that requires you to throw the ball to a degree that Wisconsin didn't always need to previously. We've said this before. This is never going to be an offense under Phil Longo where they run the ball 10 times, or excuse me, run the ball 50 times and pass it 10 times. They're still going to throw 25 plus times. He wants run pass balance. I think in the end it was 26 passes, 24 runs. Now you would have run the ball probably if you could be more consistently effective, but that's just not going to be good enough. Those big plays were encouraging, but I mean, if you're going to complete 50%, you better have the ones that you do hit be some of those bigger plays, and there just weren't enough of them. So he's been in a tough spot, obviously, 2 top 15 opponents, and this is a game next week against Purdue where you would like to be able to see him perform at a much higher level, this team perform at a much higher level, but so far it's not enough to be able to win enough. I mean, that's how it is.
I'm sorry, what was that?
It's not. Yeah, I should probably say that in a better fashion. It's just not good enough to be able to win against better teams.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, they're not playing well enough to beat the better teams. I think is that what you mean?
Yeah, but I mean, a quarterback can't just complete 50% of his passes. If you're going to throw it as much as they're throwing it.
Yeah, I thought another key play that was in the first half was his throw to Will Pauling, and he put it. It was right before halftime. He put it in a tough spot, but Will Pauling's got to catch that. If you're going, and Brad Nessler, or not Brad Nessler, Gary Danielson gave him a pass. He's like blaming it on Locke. And Locke, it was not a good pass. But if you're this team's top wide receiver, you got to catch it. You absolutely have to catch it. It was a huge play. It forced, it was on third down. If he keeps his feet and catches it, could potentially be a big play. He didn't. Drops it, and he's had drops at times, I think, throughout his time in Wisconsin. Again, he's their best wide receiver, but that was another big play, I thought, in the grand scheme of things, that potentially they could have added more points there before the end of the first half, and then they weren't able to, and never did again. So let's see what else. What else you got? Oh, Jaheim Thomas. What are we doing? What are we doing? Twice. And he doesn't get to line up on the edge that often. It's usually in third and long situations when they bring in that package. And he jumped offside twice and got replaced, and deservedly so. Got replaced. And you can't have your most experienced players, the ones that you count on, making mental mistakes like that. That's just a huge one. And then you have Tackett Curtis on the first play of the game, ripping a guy's helmet off and giving a good offense 15 more yards, something you can't obviously do. So there was also some of those mental mistakes that popped up that you're just like, ugh. I've seen way too much of that over these first couple of years. And the second half was kind of who this team has been under Luke Fickell. Would you agree or disagree with that?
100%. That's again, part of what I wrote is like I mentioned, that first half is who they aspire to be. The problem is the second half is who they have been. Mediocre, inconsistent, however you want to put it, not good enough. This is a team that's 9-8 in the last 2 seasons, 5-5 in Big Ten play. That's nowhere near the level that anybody believed was going to happen here. So for all the good vibes that the first half created, you're still left feeling like this was just more of the same old, same old. I thought it was interesting too. And another thing I wanted to mention is in the interviews after the game, talking to the players. And I think if I was a player, I would probably try to look at it this way too. They tried to find the positivity in what happened and what is happening. And I asked a lot of these guys. Preston Zachman said, we're right there. We're really close. Vinny Anthony said, we've shown we can hang with any team in the country. And Hunter Wohler, who, as we know, was displeased late last season, has struck a much different tone early this season and said that he feels like Wisconsin is trending upwards and he's not worried about where things are going. And I feel like, and this is my point of view as a sports reporter who's not on the field, who's not in the locker room, it just doesn't feel to me like that's based in reality right now. again, I can understand from the player's perspective why they would say that, and maybe they do feel that. And frankly, if you're a fan, you would want your players to feel that, because the last thing you want them to do is go into the rest of the season feeling completely demoralized and incapable of performing. I just am not seeing that outside of obviously one half against USC. So it's tough, because we all would have said Wisconsin would be 2-2 at this point in the season, and that's exactly where they are. But the way in which they're performing for the most part leaves so many more questions for the future.
Yeah, because we just haven't seen it consistently. We haven't seen what we saw in the first half on a regular basis. We've seen a lot more of what happened in the second half on a regular basis. And that is obviously not good enough. So they've got a huge chance to they have the lone get right game on their schedule coming up. Like, Purdue is reeling. They just fired their offensive coordinator and Graham Harrell. They are coming off a loss to Nebraska at home earlier this year. They allowed 66 to Notre Dame. It is interesting with the Graham Harrell thing. I think I saw somebody point out that they're 104th in points and 110th in yards. And I went and looked at Wisconsin, and they are ahead of Wisconsin in points and just barely ahead of them in yards. I did not tweet that out because I'm not a negative person. I'm not. I do not exude negativity, despite what some may say. He made that, and Graham Harrell's in his second year down there. The exact same thing that where Wisconsin's at. There, obviously, Ryan Walter took over a program that had some success with Jeff Brom, but he's a defensive head coach, and he had seen enough from Graham Harrell and fired him this week. And I don't know that it'll make a huge difference for them this year, but probably give them maybe a little bit of juice. I don't know. Do you think you get juice out of that? Or do you think it's like, oh boy, here we go, our offensive coordinator's gone. How bad do we suck?
It's possible. It's also something that's short-lived, but all you need is one game, and this would be that game. Look, if Wisconsin loses this one, I don't know. I don't know where things are going, but that's why they're a double-digit favorite.
Is this the last game they'll be a favorite in?
I don't know what the Northwestern spread's going to look like, but I can't imagine there's a whole lot more. Maybe Minnesota. Not like Minnesota's been great, but you start to look, how many more winnable games are there? They're going to have to play at a heck of a lot higher level than they have been.
Yeah, I get to play first half USC level.
Yes. First half USC level is the team that leads to a magical season, and they're not there. Not
yet. Do you think they can get there?
That's a very big question. I'm feeling, I just continue to feel more pessimistic about the outlook for this program, but we know Luke is going to be here for a while, and I've said before he's not going to stand for what's happening, which in my mind means you're going to make some changes, but it's hard to know what those changes would be or who it would be and what this looks like in the future. They're just, I don't know how much closer they are to getting there than, say, a couple of years ago, other than, like I said, kind of the infrastructure things. But sometimes it has to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately.
Yes. All right. So let's get into some fan questions. I didn't ask for questions after the game because we ended up doing our post game show, and so I didn't get a ton of questions, but some people did reach out. And the big, I wouldn't even say a big talking point, but a talking point after the game was a tweet that was sent after the game by Braylon Allen, and how he's going to hold his tongue for now, but at some point he's going to go on a podcast and tell you all the things that were going on his senior year or his last year at Wisconsin. And a lot of people made some efforts to try and get them on their podcast. I believe James White reached out and some other people reached out. I have not, because I know what the answer would be, so I didn't. But that'd be a hell of an interview if it ever actually ends up happening. That said, Michael asks, how do you and me interpret Braylon's post-game "I'm going to hold my tongue for now" tweet? Does it concern you?
I have a lot of thoughts on this. I guess
go ahead.
Well, So I think it's fair to say we don't know what he's referring to specifically in terms of the inner workings of the team. Obviously, last year they weren't particularly good. We do know how excited he was going into the season with him tweeting, "I'm not going to miss those 8 or 9 man boxes with the little deuces symbol." I think some people want to say they want to question, they want to take that and question Braylon, the player at Wisconsin. And he played hurt those 2 years. He did everything that he could on the field. Um, it's tough because I think the former players clearly are frustrated with where things are at, and they have a right to voice that displeasure, even if it isn't necessarily helpful for the program. On the other hand, to put that out there without putting it out there just leaves all this open for discussion, and I don't know that that's better. So I don't know like what the purpose of that was other than to just kind of undercut this current staff. Um and maybe that was the purpose.
I mean, it's certainly possible because it's not like it hasn't happened with some of the other people. Now, it hasn't always been the guys that actually were here last year, but I'll go to Rodas Johnson, who is down at Texas A&M right now, and there was a picture of from the Pittsburgh Steelers and Denver Broncos game where they had all these former Badgers. It was Matt Henningsen and obviously the Badgers that are on the Steelers with Herbig and Watt and Isaiah Loudermilk, and Jim Leonard was there because obviously he's with the Broncos now. It was just a big picture, and I posted it on the camp's Instagram page, and Rodas Johnson put it in his stories, and his comment was the real W with PC, which is obviously the real Wisconsin with Paul Chryst, or Paul Chryst was I think it was actually PC was the real W. Paul Chryst was the real Wisconsin. So it's not like it's not like other guys haven't, but this is a big time player with a lot of attention on him, and him coming out and saying that when he was a big time company man last year with everything that he said, there was very rarely anything bad that he had to say. And if you think about it, go back to, I mean, when they hired Al Johnson as the running backs coach, like he was not, I mean, he's like, yeah, what can he help me with? I guess my pass pro, like he took shots. He had some issues with certainly with Paul Chryst and some of that stuff too. So it's not like last year was like the year before was not some kind of shit show, because it was. Last year was as well in different, I assume. And there are rumblings about certain things that haven't been confirmed, but there are not. It's not like things were so much better in 2022 for Braylon Allen. I remember, and maybe it obviously was after Paul Chryst was fired, right? When he was asked about like about transferring and all that good stuff, like that was a shit show. And last year there were times where it probably was as well. And I think it certainly goes back to trying to meld some different things from different programs and meld some different ideas from different programs into one, and maybe not always seeing eye to eye and that type of stuff. But for him to say it and then not actually, do it, that's not ideal.
No, it doesn't make things easier. But the more you lose, the more this type of stuff happens. It's not like this is unique to Wisconsin.
CT Badger asks, do you think this team believes it can win with these coaches? He says, as a former player, I know the feeling when you don't think the coaches know what they're doing.
Yes, I think they can. I think we've been around enough players and teams that when things are falling apart, you see it in how they speak to you. And maybe they're just very good at hiding it. Or maybe they're growing accustomed to what this is like. But it feels like they are striking a tone of positivity for the future at this point. And they do have 8 regular season games remaining. So again, if they're looking for that silver lining, they can point to that first half. So but this is where it's hard, because we only know these athletes in one setting for about 10 minutes once a week, or maybe 5 minutes after the game. And so you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and you don't know whether there is more grumbling. I can't imagine they're happy with the results so far, but based on what they have projected outwardly to us, I have not seen that kind of failure to believe in the staff.
Yeah, and again, Braylon was from the previous coaching staff, right? Rodas Johnson, guy from the previous coaching staff. So they didn't necessarily come to play for Luke, or they didn't come to play for Luke Fickell or for Mike Tressel or for anybody else that was on that staff. A lot of the guys that are here now did. And now that's not everybody, right? Like Hunter Wohler and Ricardo Hallman and some of the offensive linemen, and certainly, Jez Malusi and that type of that. But they're still here for a second year. They could have gone somewhere else. So I think when you get some of that other stuff out of the locker room, that maybe it doesn't turn as quickly to a negative. But we'll see this week. I mean, this is a huge barometer of where things are at inside the locker room. If they come out and hammer Purdue and start feeling good about themselves, then you're like, okay, yeah, I think this makes sense. If it goes the other way, then you're like, all right, well, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't believe. Maybe they don't think that they can put things together and be a competent football team on a continuous basis or on a regular basis. But it's a big week. I know it's Purdue. I know they're big favorites. I know they haven't lost since 2003, but it's a big week to show where they're at mentally, I think.
It is. Look at the Illinois game 2 years ago that the next day Paul Chryst was fired, and what the players said after that. And I distinctly remember John Torchio effectively saying, like, something needs to change. What's happening right now? And he was speaking about from the team perspective. Those watershed moments happen few and far between, but when they do, that's when you raise your eyebrow and go, oh my God, there is so much dysfunction that it's coming out publicly.
Yeah. Marcus asks, are fans revising history with their current expectations? There's so much backlash, yet getting beat by elite teams and upset by lesser teams is our MO. The 19 season had losses to Illinois, then blown out by OSU, then losses in Big Ten championship game in the Rose Bowl, and that was a good year.
Well, I think this starts with beating the teams you're supposed to beat, and that to me is just from a purely results perspective, what is most glaring from why Wisconsin has slipped these last handful of years. I mentioned that Illinois game at home. Illinois hadn't beaten Wisconsin at Camp Randall, I think, in 20 years. We saw what happened last year. Indiana was 2-21 in Big Ten play when the Badgers lost that game. Northwestern had no business winning that game. And if they did, they had no business being up 3 touchdowns at halftime, and Wisconsin's getting booed off the field. So you're right. And I said this before. We all expected Wisconsin to be 2-2 at this point. Maybe you had some optimism that somehow they would beat USC because the Trojans weren't great last year. But most people thought they'd be 2-2. It's what happens in some of these games moving forward that I think shows whether there's enough progress to feel confident in the future. But why did Wisconsin consistently win those 10 games over all those years? Yeah, they knew who they were and they knew who they were going to be, but they were able to beat the teams they were supposed to beat. And maybe they would win the games, a handful, 1 or 2 that you didn't think they would. And right now, that's not where Wisconsin is.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. We'll get to that one in a second. John asks, overreaction or no? The 28 points they scored against Western Michigan will be the most they score in a game all season. Is that an overreaction or no?
I'm going to say it's an overreaction. They better exceed that mark this week. But it's not looking great for the offense. And again, they're limited in different ways, having Braden Locke as the starter when you went in thinking this was going to be Tyler Van Dyke's team. But I'm thinking like, last year they ended up being 23.5 points per game. It was the lowest mark this program had in 19 years. And I'm wondering, is this going to be better this year? It's hard to see that. So I think they'll exceed 28 maybe once, but I can't say the average is going to be better than what it was last year based on the opponents they've got.
Yeah, man, they're 2 points lower than they were last year at this point, right? I mean, they were in 23, now they're at 21. Yeah, not ideal. Friend Trent says, how is Kirk Cignetti 5-0 at Indiana?
It's the story of the Big Ten as far as I'm concerned, it's their first 5-0 start since 1967. They're in the AP top 25 now. That is a dude who came in and gave no Fs. I don't know if you saw this, but there was a reporter in his first preseason press conference, like when he was hired. It's like, how are you going to sell your vision to recruits? And he said, it's pretty simple. I win. Google me. That is correct. I don't know. Like, he brought 13 transfers from James Madison, which had been very good, and those guys have proven to be impact playmakers. I would also say Indiana has not had to play Alabama and USC. They did just beat Maryland. I think that's the only team with a winning record so far. They've got a tough schedule coming up. But absolutely, you see that and you go, well, why can't it happen at my place? It's not always that easy, but I don't have the explanation as to why it's happening there. I don't know the inner workings of Indiana, but he's obviously found a spark.
He wants me to ask if Fickell was a bad hire, but we're not going to do that. The other question was, do you believe coaching lost the game at USC?
No.
Did it have a role?
Yeah. I think when we want to assign blame, it's across the board. And I don't know what percentage of the pie goes where, because we're not in the meetings and don't know what the plan was. But obviously that second half, they didn't, I don't know how many explosive plays they attempted. They hit very few. They had 3 first downs. USC had 13. You talk about that 3rd and 15 situation. So that probably comes down to coaching and what you dial up. And at the same time, and Luke keeps coming back to this, he said, is one of the things he said after the game, there's not some magical formula that I can put forward where I call them all together and call timeout and give this big rallying cry. The guys have to go out and make the plays. So you have to put them in a position as coaches to be able to make the plays. But at a certain point, you dial up whatever you dial up, and you need somewhere among those 11 guys, somebody to do something. And they just haven't been able to do it. So it's everything. It's coaching, but it's also on the players too.
It definitely is. But that second half from both Longo and Tressel, I don't think was good enough.
No, it wasn't. That's what I'm saying. It goes everywhere. It's execution of what's being called. It's what's being called. And I don't know. Yeah, that first half, it's you exceeded what people think your ceiling is, and you came back down to earth in the second half. And it makes you wonder, well, which version is there? Why can't you do that? What you did in the first half consistently? There's a lot of reasons, obviously. There
was a moment, and you can tell me I'm a complete idiot and just disagree with me, but I was watching Luke Fickell's press conference later Saturday night, and there was a moment, I think it was Jim Polsey was asking it, and it was asking for, I don't remember the exact question, but Luke was talking, and he's like, yeah, I don't know. And he stopped himself because I thought he was about to say, I don't have any answers. I don't. And he stopped himself, and he turned it into a different, we have to do this and do that. But do you think he has answers to the things that are challenging them right now, the challenges that they're facing right now?
The question, from what I remember, is that team that you saw in the first half the team you want to be or think you can be? And I don't think that he has the answers, because if he did, they wouldn't be playing the way they are. And I think there have been instances last season, but even the course of early this season, where his answers have been indicative of that. I know a question I asked after Alabama I think it was something about the identity. And he said, we have a hell of a long way to go to figure out what it is that we want to be. And when you say that, that means that you don't have the answer. That doesn't mean he's not working an ungodly amount of hours to find that answer. But no, I don't think he has them right now. Because if you did, how could you be 9-8 and 5-5 in the Big Ten in your 17 games since you started last season? Right.
But the answers to be that team, why can't you fix the problems that are not allowing you to, I don't think he knows how to fix those problems.
I think some of them are deep. Some of them are going to require potentially changes to your staff and doing something differently to put yourself in a better position to succeed. And we'll see what he does in the offseason. I don't know if he believes that. We'll know based on his decisions. And some of it it comes down to the players that you have and how well they can execute. And that's where I think I don't know, it's a little bit deeper. Because again, yes, this was not an absolute train wreck coach taking over for an 0-12 program that over the last 3 years was like 2-34. But at the same time, they were in a really tough spot about what's the talent level. And I've said this, I feel like one of the disadvantages where Wisconsin's at in this era is the ability to develop talent over time is harder than ever now because you can't keep players. That idea of keeping a culture, I think, is harder with NIL. Now, I don't want to make excuses because there's going to be 12 teams that go to the college football playoff and have figured it out. But I think that's part of the challenge here that runs much deeper than just, what happened in one game.
Yeah. Because it's not just one game.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will get back together a little bit later this week as Wisconsin gets ready to face Purdue, a team they have not lost to since 2003. I don't want to, Since 2003, Wisconsin will take on Purdue coming up on Saturday at 11 a.m. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right. There he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.